Right now, somewhere in this country, there's a family standing at a care home reception desk, handing over a card, watching another 4 figures leave their account, and nobody has ever told them there's a test that could make that payment stop completely. Not reduce it, not help with it, stop it. Every single penny, backdated, paid by the NHS instead of by you. It's called NHS Continuing Healthcare, and here's the part that should make you angry. It has nothing to do with how much money you have. There's no means test. It doesn't matter if you own your house outright or have $500,000 in savings. If your need for care is primarily a health need, not a social one, the NHS is legally required to fund it in full. Most families never hear these words from anyone. Not the care home, not the GP, not even the hospital discharge team. They just get handed a fee schedule and told that's how it works. I'm going to show you the actual test the NHS uses to decide this, and I'm going to show you a real case. A woman who was owed money because a healthcare board got this wrong, and only got it back after she pushed. If you have a parent, a spouse, or yourself in a care home right now, or if you did in the last few years, stay to the end, because this can be backdated. Here's what almost everyone believes. Care home fees are just something you pay. Maybe the council helps a bit if you're below a certain amount of savings, but fundamentally, it's your bill, your house, your money. That's just what getting old costs. That's true for social care. It is not true for healthcare. The distinction the whole system runs on is this. Is the primary reason this person needs full-time care a health need or a social need? If it's social, general frailty, needing help with meals, company, mobility support, that falls under the local council, and yes, that's means tested. That's the world of the Care Act and capital limits. But if the primary need is a health need, complex medication regimes, unpredictable symptoms, conditions that require regular clinical judgment, not just personal care, that's NHS Continuing Healthcare. And when someone qualifies, the NHS pays for everything. The room, the food, the personal care, the nursing, all of it. No contribution from savings, no contribution from the house. The NHS itself uses 4 words to decide which category you fall into: nature, intensity, complexity, and unpredictability of your needs, not your diagnosis, not your age, how unstable, how demanding, and how hard to plan for your condition actually is, day to day. Neither does being frail or being 90. What qualifies you is the practical reality of what your body and mind need to be kept safe, and whether that reality looks like nursing or like care. So how does the NHS actually decide? There's a specific process, and knowing it is the difference between getting funded and getting quietly filtered out before anyone properly looks at your case. Step 1 is the checklist. It's a short screening tool. Any healthcare professional can complete it. A GP, a nurse, a social worker, or a hospital discharge team. Critically, you or a family member can also request it directly. You do not need to wait for someone to offer it to you. If the checklist comes back positive, it doesn't mean you're funded. It means you've earned the right to a full assessment. That full assessment is called the decision support tool, and it's done by a multidisciplinary team. At least 2 professionals from different disciplines sitting down and scoring the person across 12 care domains. Things like mobility, nutrition, continence, skin condition, breathing, medication, cognition, and behavior. Each domain is scored from no needs up through low, moderate, high, severe, and for 4 of those domains, a top level called priority. Here's the number that matters most. One single priority level need in any domain is usually enough on its own to qualify you for full NHS funding. So is having 2 or more domains at the severe level. This isn't a vague, subjective feeling the assessors have. It's a structured scoring system. And if you understand the thresholds, you can see in the paperwork exactly where your case stood and where it was underscored. There's also a separate route called Fast Track for someone whose condition is deteriorating quickly and may be entering a terminal phase. That skips the checklist and DST entirely. One clinician can trigger immediate funding. The team's recommendation then goes to the Integrated Care Board, the ICB, which replaced the old clinical commissioning groups in 2022, and they make the final decision. By national guidance, this entire process, from the first checklist to a confirmed decision, is supposed to take no more than 28 days. In practice, NHS England's own data shows only around 3 in 4 cases hit that target. Delay is baked into the system, which matters, because delay often works in the NHS's favour, not yours. Let me show you what happens when this goes wrong, using a real, published finding from the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, the body that investigates complaints against NHS bodies in England. In August 2024, the Ombudsman published the outcome of a case where a woman complained that the healthcare board responsible for her mother's care had failed to properly assess and fund her continuing healthcare. The Ombudsman's investigation found the board had got it wrong. The assessment process failed to properly establish and fund the mother's care needs. Their initial recommendation was that the family be repaid £26,382 plus interest for the time they'd been out of that money. When the healthcare board actually carried out its own internal reassessment following the Ombudsman's findings, the final amount repaid came to £37,124. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't a family that got a yes and a check in the post. This was a daughter who had to formally complain, escalate that complaint all the way to a national ombudsman, and wait for an independent investigation before a healthcare board would admit that a family member's care should have been funded in full, months or years earlier. And this is not a one-off. The Ombudsman ran a specific review of continuing healthcare complaints covering April 2018 to July 2020. Of 150 cases they investigated in depth, they found failings in 55 of them. That's 37 out of every 100 complaints that reached them, showing the NHS had got the process wrong. Not a borderline judgment call, a documented failure to follow its own framework properly. The most recent NHS England data makes the picture even clearer. Of everyone who goes through a full standard assessment, only around 17 in 100 are found eligible. Compare that to the fast-track route, for people who are clearly, visibly deteriorating, where 94 in 100 are approved. That gap is enormous. It tells you that when someone's condition is undeniable, the system works quickly and generously. When it requires judgment, discretion, and a family who knows how to push, the odds change dramatically. How past the 15th of October? Here is the piece of this that almost nobody outside specialist advocacy groups knows exists. If your relative was in care and should have been assessed for continuing healthcare, but never was, or was assessed badly, you can ask for that period to be reviewed retrospectively. This is sometimes called a previously unassessed period of care. It applies to periods going back to April 2012, and it's still an active, functioning process today. In just the first quarter of the 2025-26 financial year, NHS England recorded 118 of these retrospective cases agreed as eligible. The process works like this. You write to the relevant ICB, explain that you believe your relative met the criteria for continuing healthcare during a specific past period, and provide the evidence you have: medical records, care home notes, GP letters, anything documenting what their needs actually looked like at the time. The ICB is required to consider whether an assessment should have happened, and if the evidence supports it, they carry out a retrospective decision support tool using the historical information available. If eligibility is confirmed, the fees paid during that period should be refunded. Now, I want to be straight with you about the numbers, because this niche is full of solicitor marketing pages throwing around figures like £100,000 or £150,000 in recovered fees, and I could not verify a single one of those against a primary published source. What I can verify is the £37,000 case above, and the fact that weekly care home costs in England currently range from roughly £900 to over £1,500, depending on the region and the level of nursing needed. Multiply that by however many months or years your relative went unassessed, and you can see for yourself how quickly a legitimate retrospective claim can become a genuinely large sum without needing anyone's inflated marketing number to make the point. There is no fixed statutory deadline written into the framework for how far back you can ask. In practice, ICBs work to a standard of reasonable time, which is exactly why documentation and acting sooner rather than later matters. So where does this leave you, practically? First, if you have a relative in a care home right now and no one has ever mentioned continuing healthcare, request the checklist yourself. You do not need to wait for a referral. Ask the care home manager or the GP directly, in writing, for a CHC checklist assessment. Second, if your relative was assessed and refused, or was in care in the past and never assessed at all, start gathering the evidence now. Medical records, care home daily notes, medication charts, anything that shows the nature, intensity, complexity, and unpredictability of their needs during that period. This is exactly what a retrospective claim runs on. Third, know the appeals ladder, because most families give up at the first no. If you disagree with a decision, you have 6 months to request local resolution directly with the ICB. If that fails, you can request a local resolution meeting with a manager who wasn't involved in the original decision. If you're still refused, you can ask NHS England for an independent review panel, though this isn't automatic. NHS England decides whether your case proceeds, and if you believe the entire process was handled unfairly, that's when the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman can step in, as it did in the case I just showed you. Fourth, get help that doesn't cost you anything before you consider paying anyone. Age UK publishes a detailed fact sheet on continuing healthcare. Beacon CHC is an advocacy organisation that specialises specifically in this process. Use them before you use a solicitor who takes a percentage of whatever you recover. Fifth, and this matters, don't confuse continuing healthcare with NHS-funded nursing care. FNC is a smaller, fixed weekly contribution, currently £235.50 a week, paid when someone needs registered nursing care but doesn't meet the full CHC threshold. It's real money, but it is not the same as full funding, and some families are quietly moved on to FNC when they should have been assessed for full CHC instead. Here's what I want you to actually take from this. Care home fees are not automatically your responsibility just because someone is old, or because they have dementia, or because everyone around you says that's just how it works. There is a legal test. It has a name, a process, and 12 specific domains behind it. And when that test isn't applied properly, which happens far more often than it should, you have the right to ask for it to be redone, even for years in the past. This isn't about being difficult, it's about knowing that the system has a documented, admitted failure rate, and that silence is what it relies on. If you want to actually check where your situation stands, what the checklist thresholds look like, how the 12 domains are scored, and exactly what to put in a retrospective claim letter, I've put together a complete guide based on the official national framework. Links in the description. Subscribe if this is the first time anyone's actually explained this to you properly. And if you know someone whose parent is in care right now, paying fees every month without ever having heard the words continuing healthcare, send them this video today. It might be the most expensive conversation they never had. This is not financial or legal advice. For a decision specific to your situation, speak to Age UK, Beacon CHC, or your ICB's continuing healthcare team directly.